my name is Kevin Chow. I'm a technical support engineer here at Hawker Systems, and today's webinar is titled Tips, Tricks, and Fixes for Common SOLIDWORKS Issues. So today we'll go ahead and cover some of the most common issues that our customers contact us about, and that includes graphical and performance issues, errors and warning messages, and just other common issues that we do encounter here. So to start off, SOLIDWORKS has certain graphics cards and drivers that they certify. And using a non-certified card and driver can cause graphical and performance issues, and sometimes can cause certain features to function incorrectly. So one thing to note is that the latest or most recent graphics card driver isn't necessarily a certified one. And the way you can check to see whether or not your graphics card and driver are certified is using the Saltworks RX tool. And you can actually access that through any machine that has SOLIDWORKS currently installed at the moment. So if you go to your Start menu here, and then you go to All Programs, and down to SOLIDWORKS here, and you have your SOLIDWORKS tools, and you can go ahead and just launch the SOLIDWORKS RX tool. So once you're here, you can go to the Diagnostics tab, and sometimes it doesn't recognize your hardware at first, but if you go ahead and just reload the results, I should update it, and you'll see that it says what machine you're currently using, what graphics card you're using, as well as the driver, and whether or not it's supported and up to date. If your graphics card is supported, but you don't have a certified graphics card installed, or sorry, certified graphics card driver installed, there will be a download link that you can click. If that doesn't appear, you can always click on this link here, and what you'll get is the SOLIDWORKS webpage here, and where you can actually select what computer you're using, and just make sure to select the certified option here. And you can select the computer model. In my case, it's the HP EliteBook. And you can select your graphics card, your SOLIDWORKS version that you're currently using, as well as your operating system. And once you click Show Results here, you'll see that there's drivers here. If you click on these drivers, you can go ahead and just download them, and once you have them installed, it'll update within the SOLIDWORKS RX tool here. One thing that we have seen is if you do notice that you update to the latest certified driver, but it keeps changing to a non-certified driver, we have seen this happen, especially on Windows 10, where the graphics card driver would automatically be updated to a non-certified driver during Windows updates, and that does cause some performance issues sometimes. And to prevent this from happening, you can actually turn off the automatic update of drivers within Windows. And I'm currently on Windows 7, but the menu options are the same. So if you go to your Start menu, then go to the Control panel here. If you go to the System, and then Advanced System Settings, and for your Hardware tab, if you click on Device Installation Settings, there's an option here that says to not automatically update the driver software. So if you go ahead and just pick that option and then you update your graphics card driver, it'll prevent it from switching to a non-certified driver there. So going on to other graphics issues that we've seen here. So one of these is where the graphics area is completely transparent when you open up a model, and you just see your desktop instead. So this is actually due to a corrupted SOLIDWORKS registry key that defines the Windows position. And to fix this issue, the registry key that defines that position will have to be either renamed or deleted. And in order to do so, you'll have to access the registry editor. And if you're not comfortable with doing that, you can contact our Hawker support team, and we can assist you with that as well. But if you go to your Start menu here, if you just type in regedit, and you have your registry editor tool here. So the location of this key is located under HKey current user. And then if you expand the software, and you expand the SOLIDWORKS folder here. And then for whichever version you're encountering this issue with, in this case for SOLIDWORKS 2017, we'll go ahead and expand that folder. And then you go to the user interface folder, and then the last folder here is the settings one here. So if you click on the settings, you'll see that Windows position key here. If you go ahead and just right click on it and delete it or rename it and just relaunch SOLIDWORKS, the SOLIDWORKS window will open back to the default position and the graphics area will be visible again. So another issue that we've seen as well here is when you get something like the image on the right, where you have viewport ghosting. And this typically happens on high resolution monitors. And to disable or to resolve this issue, there's an option within Windows as well for when you launch SOLIDWORKS. So in my case, I typically launch SOLIDWORKS through the Start menu. So if you go ahead and just right click on your SOLIDWORKS, either through your icon, if you launch it on your icon, if you launch from your taskbar, just go ahead and just right click on that, go to Properties, and then you'll get this Properties dialog box. If you click on the Compatibility tab here, there's an option to display or disable display scaling on the high DPI settings. So if you go ahead and enable that, just click OK, and then relaunch SOLIDWORKS, and that should resolve the issue there. So another issue that we've seen is when users upgrade to 2017 and they try to open up their assembly or drawing, and it takes a lot longer to open up. And one common reason is this option here that we see. So if you go to Tools and then Options within SOLIDWORKS, there's a new external reference option that they introduced in 2017. So this option is actually enabled by default. And what it does is it searches any reference documents. So if you click on that reference documents button, it'll bring you to your list of reference document file locations. If you have anything specified under there, SOLIDWORKS will try to look into every single subfolder, and it'll drill down until there's no more folders to look into if this option is enabled. So if you go ahead and disable this option here, the file open time will go back to what it was before. So moving on to errors and warning messages here. So this warning message here, the default templates are not valid. It happens when a file is imported as a neutral CAD format, such as a STEP, IGES, or Parasolid file. And the reason this can happen is because SOLIDWORKS isn't able to recognize those default templates. So what SOLIDWORKS does when it imports a neutral CAD format is it automatically checks those default templates and uses those to open up the files. So if you do encounter this error message, it's important to just reassociate those default templates or just try a different template as well. And to do that, if you have SOLIDWORKS open here, if you go to your tools and then options here, and then you have your default templates on the left here. So just click on this button in the middle here, and you can just select your part and do that. And do the same thing for your assemblies and drawings as well. And it'll populate this path with the correct template there. If you already do have a template location listed there and it's the correct one, go ahead and just pick that same template again, because sometimes SOLIDWORKS just doesn't recognize that particular reference. So after you do that, go ahead and just click OK and just try re-importing your neutral CAD format file again. If you do still encounter that same default templates issue, try a different template, because it is possible that the template that you have specified there is having the issue. So moving on to the next issue here. So this issue, it's a pretty vague error message, to be honest. And this sometimes happens when opening a file. So it says an error was encountered while trying to open your file, contact technical support for a possible solution. So what this refers to is that there's some amount of corruption within the file that you're opening. And file corruption can actually occur in a number of different ways, but the most common reasons are when SOLIDWORKS crashes when the file is opened, or if there's network instability when working on a file that's located on a network. So SOLIDWORKS 2017 actually did introduce some file repair functionality, and you can access that by going through the file open command and selecting your file, or if you're just dragging the file from Windows Explorer into SOLIDWORKS. If that doesn't fix the issue, there's a few manual troubleshooting steps for assemblies and multi-sheet drawings that you can go through to narrow down the issue here. So you'll notice that I didn't specify parts on this list here. Typically, if the corrupt file error message appears for a part and it can't be opened, it'll likely have to be recreated, just because there aren't any sort of safe modes or anything like that to open up a part file there. If that's not an option to recreate the file, you can contact our Hawkers support team and we can look into all the alternatives. We might be able to forward the file to SOLIDWORKS depending on the circumstances. And they do have additional tools to view those files, but that's not a guarantee that it can be fixed, though. So I'll just go through the steps that you go through to troubleshooting these files here. So if I go over to my assembly here, so I don't have a corrupt file here at the moment, but the steps to go through these are still the same. So for example, if I open up my assembly here and I see that it crashes SOLIDWORKS, or I encounter that message, either way, you can try opening up this file within SOLIDWORKS first. So if you go to File Open and you actually browse to that location here, you'll have to select your assembly here first. And for the configurations here, like don't open it yet. First of all, pick the configurations. There's actually an advanced configuration for assemblies here. So if you select this advanced configuration and then select the Open button, you'll actually receive another dialog box before your assembly opens up here. And the option that we do want to select is this third one here. The new configuration is showing assembly structure only. So you'll have to give it a configuration name, in which case I'll just name it test here. And basically what this option will do is it'll create a new configuration within your assembly and open up that configuration with all of your components suppressed. So after this has been done, you click OK. So one of two things will happen here. Either you click OK and you'll receive that error message or SOLIDWORKS will crash. And that indicates an issue with the actual assembly file itself. And if that happens, it's likely the assembly will have to be recreated. However, if you click OK and the assembly opens up, fine. It's likely that there's an issue with one of the components of that assembly here. So you'll notice everything comes in suppressed. So to narrow down which component is causing the issue here, if you go ahead and just right click on your component here and just go through and unsuppress it, just kind of go through that one at a time. If you have multiple components, you can highlight them all and just do the unsuppress here. And you just go through until you encounter an issue that brings up that error message or causes SOLIDWORKS to crash. And in either case, it's likely you'll have to reopen the file again just to get back to this point. So if you do know, once you've narrowed down which component is causing the issue, you'll want to check whether or not it's the actual component that's causing the crashing or the error message to appear, or whether it's kind of the instance of that component within your assembly. So to check that, what you'd do is you'd go in and just open up that component within SOLIDWORKS. So in which case, that's the crank assembly here. If I just go ahead and just double click on it to open it up, and this file opens up fine. So in this case, it's likely there's an issue with that instance within the assembly, in which case you'll have to just delete it from here and just reinsert that component again. and then resave your assembly. If you do have, if you tried to open up that component and you do encounter that error message, it is coming from that component. So if it's part, it's likely you'll have to recreate it. If it's in a subassembly, you'll just go through the same steps that we went through here, opening it up in this mode here, advanced configuration, and just doing the opening up with assembly structure only. Okay. So going on to multi-sheet drawings. So if we have this drawing here, and we're receiving that error message when opening up that drawing, or SOLIDWORKS is crashing when that file is being opened, we'll go through a similar process where we go through the file open dialog box here. And we go ahead and just select the drawing here. And instead of doing a configuration, you'll change the mode to quick view. So what this mode does is it loads up SOLIDWORKS, or it loads up the drawing in SOLIDWORKS with graphics only. So you'll see the graphics that was last saved with. If the file opens up fine, we can continue with the troubleshooting steps. If it crashes or you see that error message, it's an issue with the drawing as well. So if you do see that error message, the entire drawing will have to be recreated again. But if we go ahead and just open it up here, and you see that opens up. Interesting. Okay, well, looks like I did encounter a corrupt file here, which wasn't part of the plan. But if you do see that particular error message, then you notice that you can't open it up. You'll have to forward that to your reseller here. So you just contact us at Hawkridge Systems, and we can go ahead and investigate it further. Let me go ahead and just get a new copy of that file. Okay, so let's try that one more time here. So if we go ahead and just open up that drawing again, and with that safe mode here, you'll notice everything comes in graphics only. So we don't have any sort of feature manager on the left here. You can't actually right click on it and modify this drawing. Everything at the top here is grayed out. You can't add any annotations or sketches, and that's because it's loaded in quick view mode. And that's just the graphics only mode from when it was last saved. So similar to what we did for the assembly here, if you go ahead and just right click on the sheet itself, and you just click on load sheets or load sheet, and just go through them one at a time until you encounter that error message or SOLIDWORKS crashes, and then you can narrow down the issues for that particular sheet. So in this case, we'll just load in sheet 1 and sheet 2. And if sheet 3 is the one that's causing the issue, it's likely you'll have to reopen up the drawing again with quick view, load in the first 2 sheets since you know those 2 are working fine, and just omit the 3rd sheet that's having the issue. Unlike an assembly, you can't actually delete a sheet when it's loaded in quick view. There's no options here to delete it. So what you'll actually have to do is create a brand new drawing. But you can actually copy these sheets over to a new drawing. So that'll minimize the amount of work that you'll have to recreate. So if we go ahead and create a drawing here, just a blank one. And then we go back to our original drawing that's having the issue. If you go ahead and just activate sheet 1 here, and there's a copy button. So if you go ahead and click that copy, go back to your other drawing, and you can actually just right click again here, at the bottom, and you can paste it. So you'll get a dialog box here that just says where you want to paste it. It doesn't really matter too much since you can always rearrange it at the end. And we'll go ahead and just do the same thing for the other sheet. So just activate it down here, right-click on it and just select copy. And then just go back to your new drawing here and just right-click down here and just do paste. And in this new drawing, you could probably delete the initial sheet that is created since that's blank here. Just say yes, and then you'll have your new drawing minus the third sheet that's having the issue. And if you need to, you can always click and drag at the bottom here and just rearrange these sheets. So if these steps for the assembly and drawings don't resolve the issue, or if you'd like to see if these corrupted files can be recovered, you can contact our Hawkridge support team and we can look into any alternatives as well. Okay. So the next thing I want to talk about is the SOLIDWORKS search routines for what it uses to find reference documents. So whenever an assembly is opened, it'll check the references typically and just open up the corresponding files. However, SOLIDWORKS does have some special rules that it follows, where it can locate files if they're not at their specified locations and things like that. And I actually have the help file for the SOLIDWORKS search routine rules here. And as you can see, there's quite a few rules, and they have an example of how SOLIDWORKS would go through your files there, or your folders there, to try searching for the correct file. But the most important one that I want to talk about here is the very first one here. So what it does is it uses any open documents with the same name. So I do have an example illustrating this particular issue here, or the potential issue that it can cause. So let me go ahead and close out of these files here. So just going back to the assembly that we've been using, you'll notice that this is our assembly here. And we have a part here, one component named base. And if we open up this component, you'll notice it's just a rectangular extrude with some cutouts in it, nothing too fancy here. And if we go back to our assembly, and then we go to File, and then Find References, you'll notice all of these components are located in the same folder. So all located in this grinder assembly folder. So let me go ahead and just open up a different base file. So this file has the same name. It's also named base, but it's clearly different, just a circular extrude instead. So if we do have this open in the background, say we're working on this, and we decide to work on our assembly, and we don't realize this is still open, and we go ahead and just open up our assembly, at first you'll see that it looks like it's correct, but this is a little misleading because this is just displaying the graphics of what we had before. So I'll just hit Don't Rebuild for now. And you'll notice it replaced it with the wrong base part. And if we go ahead and check the file references up here, you'll notice that the folder location is in the wrong location. So right now it's pretty obvious that it got changed, but for those of you who have a lot larger assemblies, you might not notice it, especially if it's kind of just in some small corner of your assembly. And also, if the file hasn't been rebuilt, you don't see anything, any error messages or anything like that. But notice as soon as I rebuild the file from here, we just get all of these errors, and the feature manager just basically turns red, and that's because of all these mates that were pointing to that component. And those can't be resolved at the moment. So because of this potential issue, it's recommended to typically use unique file names, just so you don't encounter this. If you do catch it when it first happens, you can just close out of the file and just reopen it, and that won't save any of the references. So say the wrong component was loaded into your assembly. And like I said before, you could just close it out and reopen it if you catch it the very first time. However, if you accidentally save it with that wrong file reference, you can actually replace that particular component in one of two ways, either through the file open dialog box, or you could just replace the component within the assembly. So going back to here. So for now, I'll just go through, if you have the file open, and you can replace the component by right-clicking on the component in the feature manager. You might need to expand the menu sometimes, but if you click on replace components, you can actually browse to your new file or the correct file here. And just select that and just click open. And there's an option to reattach the mates as well. So if you have that enabled and you click the checkbox, you'll notice that it reattaches it here. And if not, if these don't automatically reattach, then those mates will have to be redone manually. Let me go ahead and close out of this here without saving. So the other way to fix those references here is if you go to your file open dialog box at the top, and you go ahead and just select your assembly, but don't actually open it yet, you'll have a references button on the right side of the file open dialog box. And if you click on that, you can view the references already. And so you can actually double click either on the file to browse to the file, or you can double click on the folder side to browse to the correct folder. But if you go ahead and just double click on the part there, you'll get another file open dialog box where you can actually browse to the correct file and just click open. And you'll notice that the color changes here, which indicates that it's been updated. Go ahead and click OK, and then open the part after that. You'll see the old incorrect file reference here. And if we go and just rebuild it, you'll see that it's updated here. So if you go through all your file, if you open up your file and SOLIDWORKS goes through all those search rules and it still can't find the file, you'll get the warning message on the right. So the most common cause of this is if files were moved incorrectly or renamed incorrectly, especially using Windows Explorer. And the reason being is because when you do that within Windows Explorer, none of those SOLIDWORKS references are updated. And so moving or renaming it has a pretty big potential of breaking those references. So if you do get this error message when opening up your file, you can actually just select the Browse to File option. And once you browse to it, select it and open up your file, it'll open up with the correct reference there, and you can just save the file and that'll update the reference. So the recommended way to move a file is within the SOLIDWORKS Explorer tool. So if you go to your Start menu and just All Programs and just go back to your SOLIDWORKS here, you can see that there's a SOLIDWORKS Explorer option. So we go ahead and just open that up. And you might need to expand the box here. And if you go ahead and just browse to your file, you can actually select your file here. I'm going to just expand this a little bit more. So if you select your file here, either right click on the file or just left click on it, you'll get some of these options up here. So there's one here for SOLIDWORKS Move, and then one here for SOLIDWORKS Rename. The reason you want to use these is because it does keep those references intact. So even if you move them to a completely different location where even the SOLIDWORKS search routines can't find them, it'll still update it so that it'll be able to find the correct file. So I'll go ahead and just click on this SOLIDWORKS Move here, and you'll get this window here. And you can actually browse to where you want your file to be moved to, and you can update where update the references of where these files are used. In this particular case, it's being used in a drawing. So it'll update the file references there so that the next time we open up that drawing, it'll be able to open up correctly instead of just displaying an error saying that it can't find the file. So the other way to do this, it uses the same interface, but you can actually go through the SolidWorks, or sorry, you can actually go through the Windows Explorer here. And if you right-click on your file here, you should see a SolidWorks option here. And you can see that there's the move and rename option as well. And this actually brings up the same dialog box that we saw before here. So it's recommended to use the SolidWorks Explorer to move files, since that's the only way that you can kind of guarantee that the references will remain intact. If you do follow the SolidWorks search routines, SolidWorks might be able to open up the correct file, and you can save it, and then everything will still work fine. But there's always a risk that you can break those references when moving them around in Windows Explorer here. So the next issue I want to talk about here is when toolbox components are automatically replaced. So a symptom of this is typically when one user opens up the assembly and it looks fine. All the toolbox components look as they're supposed to. And then another user opens up the same assembly there, and all of those toolbox components just look incorrect. The reason being is it's likely that the toolboxes being used on both machines are different, first of all. And second of all, there's a SolidWorks option where it automatically looks to the local toolbox and replaces it with any components in there. So I do have an example of this here. And before I open up that file, just to illustrate where that option is, if you go to Options and the whole wizard / toolbox on the left here. And you'll notice this is the option I'm talking about here. So it says make this folder the default search location for toolbox components. And it's referring to this file location here. So by default, this option is actually enabled, and it's pointing to the local toolbox. So what this does is SolidWorks, if it's enabled, if this option is enabled, SolidWorks will look at any toolbox components, and it'll find the reference that basically marks it as a toolbox component, and then it'll check this folder here to see if that same reference exists in any of the parts. And if it does, it'll open up that file. And let me go ahead and just illustrate this here. So right now this option is disabled, so it won't do any sort of replacing at the moment. But this is the test assembly that I have here. So you'll notice we have one toolbox component, and this is actually something I created after modifying a existing default toolbox component. And you can actually tell that it's a toolbox component from the feature manager by the toolbox icon on the left. So let me go ahead and just open up this component here. And it's pretty standard toolbox component with the exception of this extra revolve that I add in here just to differentiate it. And if I go ahead and close out this part and I go to the file references, and you'll notice that this toolbox component is pointing to the folder where I have all of these components. And you can see that it's there as well in my Windows Explorer. So let me go ahead and close out of this assembly here for now and enable this option in the whole wizard toolbox. And I'll just go ahead and click OK. So now when I open up this assembly, what it'll do is it'll reference that particular toolbox to load up any toolbox components. So if I go ahead and just double click on my assembly here to open it up, it looks correct at first in the preview, but then when it finally loads in, you see that it's a completely different part. And if you go to your file references, find references, you'll notice that it's actually pointing to this the local toolbox here, which is specified in your options. So this is a similar issue in which components would be replaced, but in this case, this replacement is being caused by the SolidWorks toolbox option. So if you do encounter this issue at first, the first time you open up this assembly and you see this, you can close out of the assembly and disable that option and reopen it, and everything should look fine. However, if it was accidentally saved with the default toolbox components, then those would have to be replaced, similar to what we did before with either the file open and then replace references here. And go here. And you can actually replace those components. Looks like I have it already open, so it's not letting me do it right now, but you can do it from there, or you could just right-click on the components in the feature manager and just do that replace components. So if everyone is using the same toolbox, this option here in the whole wizard toolbox isn't going to be an issue, since everyone will have that same, be using the same toolbox. So this is just one thing to be aware of if everyone has their own toolbox and this option is enabled. There's a potential that these toolbox components can be accidentally replaced. So one more thing that I want to go over here for the next issue. So this is another issue that we do see fairly often, is when the symbols show up as a syntax. And basically what happens is the syntax will display instead of the symbols here. And basically what happens is when the symbols library file that SOLIDWORKS uses can't be found. And this happens sometimes after an installation. If some old settings were imported, it'll be looking at the wrong location, and that will be replaced here because it won't have the symbols library file to replace it with. So as an example here, I have a drawing, and you'll notice that all these symbols are all just displaying syntax. If we go ahead and just go to the options here and go to the symbol file locations here, and you just go to the symbols library file, we'll find this particular folder here. And if you go ahead and just go browse through that, I'll go ahead and just browse through that within Windows Explorer, and you'll notice that this folder is empty. And since there's no file here, it doesn't have the symbols library file to translate those syntax back into a symbol. And what it's actually looking for is this gtold.sym file. So if we go back to SOLIDWORKS here, and we go ahead and just delete this file location, and just add in the correct file location here, and we go ahead and just click OK, you'll notice all of these update here properly. So the symbols library file is something that can be customized so that you have your custom symbols. So if you were using a customized symbols library file before, you can actually point to that file here instead of pointing it to the default location. And also the other thing to note is that this symbols library file isn't version specific, so you can actually copy it from a previous version of SOLIDWORKS if it can't find it in this default location, or you can copy it from another coworker's machine. I do see that we have some questions here. I'll go ahead and address those towards the end here. So one more thing that I want to talk about here. So we've covered most of the issues, or all of the issues that I was going to cover over today, but there's one more thing I'd like to talk about, is the SOLIDWORKS RX tool. So this tool is actually pretty useful if you're encountering an issue. You can actually record your basically issues that you're encountering and reproduce them, and you can patch them with some log files that you can forward to support if need be. So let me go ahead and just go back to the RX tool, and once again, that's located in your Start menu, All Programs, and then SOLIDWORKS, and then SOLIDWORKS Tools and SOLIDWORKS RX here. And we'll go to the Home tab first of all. And in the Home tab, you'll notice that there's some safe modes here at the bottom. And so the first one is to open SOLIDWORKS in the software OpenGL mode. And what this does, it opens up and uses the process to render all the graphics only. And basically, this will help narrow down an issue with the graphics card or the driver. The second mode is it bypasses the tools and options settings. So it sets SOLIDWORKS settings back to the default just to narrow down an issue and see whether or not it's an issue with those settings there. And once again, the diagnostics tab here, we mentioned this earlier, you can use this to make sure you're on the certified card and driver, just to avoid any sort of performance issues. And the last tab I do want to talk about here is the problem capture tab. So in this here, you can actually record the steps that you take up that leads up to an issue that you're encountering. So if you go ahead and just click the Start Capture button, it'll launch SOLIDWORKS if you don't have it open yet. If you do, it'll give you a dialog box saying whether or not you want to use the current session or restart SOLIDWORKS, and you can pick either one. If you're encountering the issue and you have SOLIDWORKS open already, you might just want to select use the current session. But once this is open, you can hit the Start Recording button here, and you'll notice it starts recording in the lower right here. And you can just go through your steps to reproduce the issue. Say you have an issue opening up a file, you can just go to File Open and just pick your file. And once it's done, you can go ahead and just click the Finish Recording button in this dialog box. And it'll close it down SOLIDWORKS, and if need be, it'll ask you to save any files. And then once that has been done, you can actually package the files now. So if you click on this button, it'll create a zip file that contains the video that you just created, and as well as some log files that we can look through to see if there's something there that's causing the crashing or whatever issue that you're encountering. And it'll also include the SOLIDWORKS files that you're working on. So one thing to note is that this file does contain your serial number, so you want to be careful who you send these files to. And so if you do encounter this issue and you like one of our support agents to take a look at it and assist you, you could forward it to our support team. And I've been talking about contacting our support team this entire webinar. And to do that, there's actually a phone number you can call. There's a couple ways to reach us. So one is the phone number here that you see on your screen. And you can give us a call between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. Monday through Friday to talk to one of our agents. If you pick one, you'll get technical support. And from there, you'll get additional phone menu options to basically narrow down the issue, whether it's a installation or a licensing issue or an issue with SOLIDWORKS itself or one of its add-ons. You can also send us an email here at support@hawkridgesys.com, and that'll generate a ticket. And the other way you can create a ticket is if you go to our website and create an account and log in, you can create a ticket from there as well. We do have a chat as well that you can access from our website. So this option is pretty useful for quick questions. If you do have more complicated issues, it's often quicker to give us a call instead. So that's all I have for you guys today here. So thanks for joining in on today's webinar.